me," he stuttered. Kabuki grabbed Marcus' shirt, lightly grazing his hips with her fingernails. He shuddered in arousal and moaned heavily. He rubbed his lips over hers, his eyes closed, completely consumed by her fragrance. "Kabuki," Marcus stressed her name, his lips still lightly brushing hers. "Marcus, pull me closer to you," he begged her. Kabuki moaned and gently tugged on his shirt. Marcus felt his knees weakening when his thighs touched hers. He groaned and kissed her deeply. It was a quest to satisfy an insatiable hunger. The more he kissed her, the hungrier he got for her. He placed his hand around her waist and moved his palm across her back until his right hand was holding the back of her neck as he rammed his hungry tongue deep into her throat. He groaned heavily for how sweet and soft she felt. Kabuki was filled with passion. She had undone a few buttons of his shirt and slipped her fingers in to rub his bare skin. Marcus let out a groan and a gasp, all mixed together, and jumped back from her suddenly. Kabuki was startled. Her eyes were glazed over with passion as she stood, staring at him. He ran his fingers through his hair and paced wildly. Kabuki could see his huge arousal imprinted in his pants, and it made it even hotter. She walked in the middle of the room and stepped out of her shoes. Marcus stopped pacing to watch her. Then, she pulled her blouse out of her high-waist skirt, all the while keeping eye contact with Marcus. He couldn't take his eyes off her. He watched her as she turned around and looked over her shoulder at him, waiting for him to come to her. He took 2 strides, and her skirt was a purple pool around her legs. He was on his knees, his face buried in between her butt cheeks. She gasped sharply as he pulled down her tongue and swiftly turned her around. He slicked his tongue over her clitoris and she almost keeled over. He let out a satisfactory groan. "Oh, yes, Kabuki, you're delicious." He reached under her blouse and caressed her full, supple breasts. Kabuki's legs buckled in climax. She grabbed his head and pulled him up to her. She kissed him hungrily and took off his shirt. Then she pushed him back so she could look at him, and he looked at her. She took her blouse off and rushed to him. She pressed her supple breast in his chest and ran her hands through his hair. He moaned, groaned, and whispered her name over and over and over. He was helplessly hungry for her. She unbuttoned his pants, hurriedly pulled them off, and then knelt down in front of his pulsing arousal. At this point, he was shuddering, and he ran his shaky fingers through her hair. "Kabu," he groaned loudly. "I want to taste you." With that, she grabbed his hot rod and swallowed him whole in the warmth of her mouth. He bent his knees lightly and clenched his buttocks as waves of passion runched through her fingertips into his skin, through her velvety mouth around his cock, into his body. He clenched his butt cheeks some more and grabbed her head. She was going back and forth on his hot rod, and he couldn't stop moaning. He started moaning her name loudly, and she grabbed his balls, caressing them lightly as she mouth-rolled his bulging work-hard cock. He exploded into the back of her mouth in a massive climax, spilling his seed into her mouth and down her breasts. He was still madly aroused. His eyes were bloodshot, and his massive member was hard, bulging and bobbing down at her. He picked her up, wrapped her legs around his waist, and she gasped when her nipples brushed his chest. He bent his knees slightly and sat on his cock, deeply looking into her eyes as he surrendered all of him into her. He moved them over to the wall and pressed her against it. She arched her back and lifted her arms up above her head. With each thrust into her, he watched her breast heave sensually. Her nipples were hard and so inviting. He flicked them with his tongue. She whimpered at the touch of his tongue on her nipples and squeezed her kegels around his throbbing rod. The sensations that rippled through him when she did that made him let out a harsh moan. He caressed her breast with one hand and sucked on her nipples. She went crazy. She started moaning his name louder, moving her hips faster to his rhythm and squeezing her kegels tighter and tighter. Marcus, I'm gonna come again. She was breathing so hard. Together, Marcus said, as he moaned and buried his face into her neck. They climaxed together and she gushed her squirt all over his legs.